The River Nile, whose waters carried the ships of kings and pharaohs, bore to an infant named Moses. The banks of the Jordan beckoned the children of Israel. Galilee witnessed the miraculous "Peace, be still." The Great Sea, the Mediterranean, served in the mission of Paul to Ephesus and Corinth. The Aegean carried John, exiled to the Isle of Patmos. From Genesis to Revelation, the waters of the Bible lands.
Shalom, hello again. Back with our Living Waters series, and this will be a show you'll remember. We're going to show you the pyramids. Last week we were in Cairo and on the Nile River, and we saw the magnificent ruins at Saqqara and Memphis. But these are the ones the whole world knows and loves. These huge monuments, these massive tombs. And the children of Israel, of course, saw these when they were enslaved there in Egypt, and Abraham saw them, Moses saw them, imagine. They've been from time immemorial. I'll show you on the map where we are. Well, over here in Cairo, here is Israel, and here, of course, is Egypt, and Cairo is here. We're going inland a little ways from the Nile to Giza, sort of suburban to Cairo, where the pyramids are located.
The Red Sea, its Hebrew name means Sea of Reeds. It was here, near the site of the present-day Suez Canal, that the miracle of the Exodus took place. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground.
In the land of the Red Sea, the land of Pharaoh, the land of the Exodus, God did one of his mighty miracles, parted the body of water, and the children of Israel came out on dry land. Everybody knows the story, but to know all of Egypt's story is to have to understand fully 6,000 years of history. This nation is old. The only sovereign nation operating today that's older than the land of Israel. They had the pyramids built here 1,000 years before Abraham ever came. Abraham lived about 2000 BC, and when we talk about biblical history, we usually start at that point. That is, we could start the Garden of Eden. The flood, of course, is earlier, but to talk about the covenant of between Abraham and the chosen people, the beginning of the biblical conception called redemption that leads to the Messiah coming and salvation as we know it, we start with Abraham. But to talk about Egypt, we have to start before Abraham. If you calculate the time from the building of the Great Pyramids, about 3000 BC, all the way to eternity, and Egypt will exist through the kingdom. We're going to look at that. We have some 6,000 years of history. It would work this way: from 3000 BC to Christ is 3000. 2,000 years AD that we have put in now, and a 1,000-year kingdom to come is a minimum of 6,000 years. Well, when Abraham did come down into Egypt, it was from a Canaan that was suffering at the time when he came there. He went down there with his wife. Pharaoh became enamored of his wife. We all know that story. The friend of God was banished as morally unfit to live in Egypt when he tried to pretend his wife was his sister for Pharaoh's benefit, and took a spoil. He took cattle, gold and silver and so forth. It's one of the stories of a man of faith which describes, as the Old Testament is always so frank, that life is neither all one way or the other. The man of faith in that case did sin, and did it again later with King Abimelech back in the Holy Land. But that's the beginning of talking about Egypt and Pharaoh's court in the Bible. And when we follow Abraham's adventures, we get to know the place. Then later with Joseph, of course, the next fourth generation down in the covenant, we find him carried off by the caravan, sold into slavery by his brothers. I think we all know that story from Sunday school. He became vice pharaoh of all Egypt, and this dreamer of dreams becomes a wonderful type of Messiah, whose brothers reject him at first, but then later bow down before him. In the case of Joseph, of course, his brothers rejected him when he interpreted the dreams that he had up in Canaan, and they threw him into the pit and sold him to slavery. But later they come to Egypt, and they don't even recognize him. So many years later, and splendidly dressed in the clothing of the court of the Egyptians, and speaking to them coldly through an interpreter, finally breaking down one of the most emotional scenes in the Old Testament. Doth my father yet live, he says, and he's reconciled to his brothers. They embrace. The story is of the Lord, the Messiah, and his brethren, the Israelites, the Jews, the chosen people, who have rejected him, but in the end will be reconciled to him when, as in Zechariah 12:10, they look upon me whom they've pierced and mourn for him as for an only son. Well, Paul exalts all Israel will be saved when the deliverer shall come out of Zion, and that will be the moment like the throne room when the brothers will finally embrace again. But to go back to our story of the long, long history of Egypt, the next dealing with Israel is the worst one of all, and that's the 400 years of slavery. Of course, Jacob and his family were invited down by Joseph. 70-odd souls came down to Egypt. 400 years later, 2 million or so, 2.5 million came out as slaves, but they bred well in that time. But they built the Egyptian monuments in the hot desert, and I can tell you this desert is hot. This is the desert that extends down into Egypt that holds the pyramids and the public monuments that the slaves had to build under the lash. When you think of a figure like 400 years, and this is a small figure, in talking about the history of Israel or of Egypt, that's twice the length of the history of the United States. We really have lived only a short time, we who view the world from our perspective, compared to these vast, vast periods of time. Imagine a whole nation, grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, all the way down to the descendants of 400 years, all born and dying in slavery. But then, of course, the great Exodus. I don't have to tell you that story. And when we do our Passover programs, we tell it in full. The Exodus from Egypt is well supported. The Tel El Amarna letters have been discovered. They verify the Exodus in the sense of they're not spiritual, they are simply military communications. That is, when the children of Israel came out, the sea parted, they went into the Sinai, letters were sent ahead about escaped slaves, the Hibiru, they say, which is a construction of Hebrew from ancient days, heading toward the outposts of Egypt along the logical trade route leading over toward Jericho, and warnings to outposts there that these slaves are on their way and they might do something to try to control them. These letters therefore verify, well, they don't say the sea parted, but they sure say that the slaves have escaped and are on the loose and are great in number and are heading up the line to Egyptian outposts, which may need reinforcing and so forth, and should take a defensive posture. This is about 1500 BC, so if the Great Pyramids were in 3000 and Abraham is about 2000 BC, 500 years later is the Exodus, and then the Israelites are in their land. And relations with Egypt are a bit more peaceful in that time, especially during Solomon's time and with his skillful alliances with surrounding nations, marrying the daughters of kings and so forth, and conducting mutually profitable business contracts with Egypt and others. There was peacetime for a period of time, marred actually by the death of King Josiah 7 centuries or 8 centuries before Christ, who it wasn't Israel's quarrel, but Josiah was offended by Egypt meeting in war with Syria up in the north country around the valley of Megiddo, which is Israeli land, and came up there personally to stop the conflict, and felled by an arrow in the field and carried back to Jerusalem in state in one of the saddest days of Israel's history. The funeral of Josiah marked out in Zechariah 12 as well, with such sadness and lamentation. Then the relations are quiet again because both Israel and Egypt become occupied territory under huge and powerful empires of Persia, of Greece, of Rome, of Babylon, etc. much warring and so forth, but neither nation really sovereign in charge of its own destiny in the face of those big empires. And we come down to the Lord's career in Egypt. We sometimes forget Jesus fleeing to Egypt to avoid the infanticide of Herod. Herod killing all the male children to try to prevent the birth of the Jewish deliverer, even as Pharaoh tried to prevent the birth of Moses with the killing of the sons of the Jews there in Egypt. Neither birth was prevented. Both were prophesied. It is written, as the Lord liked to say, and men can't prevent what is written in Scripture. And so the Lord was born and spirited away of all places to Egypt, so that God could do a play on words. For one thing, Hosea 11:1, I have called my son out of Egypt, meaning I've rescued the children of Israel from slavery, as against Matthew 2, where the Lord says, I have called my son out of Egypt, meaning his only begotten son, the Messiah, who fled to Egypt and then is called back out to pursue his ministry in the Holy Land. Egyptian history with Israel then is quiet because the Jews are dispersed out of the land. At that time, when the Lord fled, they were both, in effect, Roman provinces, and the Romans did administrate both countries, and Israel fled out of its land because of the temple destruction in 70, and again in 135, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. The dispersion began in earnest, and the Jews were not to return until 1948, when their old neighbors, the Egyptians, were just waiting for them, and the war broke out almost as fast as they declared independence, well, immediately. And Egypt and a number of other Arab nations fell on the newly declared independent nation of Israel. In our lifetimes, we can remember that. And then, after that pause of almost 19 centuries, there's war and more war. War in 48, war in 56, war in 67, war in 73, Egypt versus Israel. Finally, with the Camp David Accords in 1977, we have a peace covenant that at last works as it worked in Solomon's time. Egypt and Israel it's not an uneasy peace, it's peace, but a strange kind of peace. Israeli tourists go down into Egypt all the time to look at the pyramids and the magnificent works. The Egyptians never come to Israel. Their government, I think, doesn't prefer them to see how well the Arab lives in Israel. The Arab lives better on the West Bank in Israel than any Arab in the world, and particularly better than Arabs in Egypt, who, unfortunately, a very overpopulated and disorganized nation, has a lot of problems taking care of its people. It kind of brings us up to the present day, but I have hardly begun to talk about Egypt because Scripture goes on to talk about the Egypt of the kingdom. Quite a different place, still closely related to Israel, still under God's sovereignty and important to Him. And we'll take that up back in the studio.
Experience the waters and sights of the Bible lands. On this series of programs, we're introducing Zola's newest music cassette, Living Waters, for a gift of $12 or more, and a CD for a gift of $15 or more. The 12 programs comprising Living Waters are also available on 3 video cassettes. A Journey from the River Nile to the Isle of Patmos for a gift of $99 or more. A free catalog containing all of Zola's offerings is available upon request.
This is the pyramid, which is the only surviving wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it is almost 5,000 years old. It was built for a king. His name is Cheops, or Khufu, that was his Egyptian name, and it was estimated that it took him about 30 years, 30, to finish building his pyramid, having 80,000 men doing this for him, and they were shifted almost every 4 months. And these people, the laborers, they were forced laborers. They were not slaves as some people think. And they should be Egyptians because they should be appreciating what they are doing, building the eternal house of their own God King. Approximate height of this pyramid is about 480 feet. And if you look on the top of this pyramid, there is an iron rod. It marks the original height of it, because it was higher than that with the outer facing. The blocks that you see, they are limestone ones cut or quarried from this plateau. Average weight is 5 tons. And inside we have granite ones brought from Aswan, shipped along the Nile. They are 30 tons each, average weight. The blocks are about 2.5 million separate ones. So the estimated total weight of this pyramid is about 6 million tons. The base of this pyramid is about 13 acres. And the length of each side is about 700 feet. And the 4 sides should be facing the 4 cardinal points exactly, and they do. How this pyramid was built, or any other pyramid, we were not that sure about the real method they used to build the pyramid, but here in Giza somewhere, they excavated an unfinished pyramid, and this one had a ramp, which gave most of the Egyptologists that all pyramids were built by the same way, which is the ramp idea. First of all, they have to level the plateau, build the first course of the pyramid, make sure that it's a square shape. The 4 sides are facing the 4 cardinal points, and they start making or building a ramp out of sand and sandstones along which they drag the sleigh. On it is the stone, manpower only. No machinery 5,000 years ago, no iron, only manpower. And patience and belief. They have to believe in what they're doing. And then they keep on extending the ramp. The more they go up, they extend it till they reach the middle of the pyramid. They build the inside, so on and so on. Very simple to say that, but this was done, again, without any sophisticated implements or tools. And then for the outer facing or the casing, they went from top to bottom. The more they stick or plaster the facing, they take off or demolish the ramps.
It's rather unbelievable when you get inside to imagine that for all those thousands of people brought boulders upon boulders in, you know, and the engineering that went into it. And as Judy was saying, the expertise that went into that, it's hard to believe that they haven't continued to develop since those years. Instead, they're just standing pat. Marvel of engineering, it's fantastic.
Judy, what's your feeling about the structure?
It's unbelievable. The angle, how they got to the top, I'll never know to build. It's just marvelous.
My wife actually thought it was larger than she thought it would be, and I thought it was smaller than I thought it would be. Surprised that they were able to build it in only 30 years, though, and rotating 80,000 forced laborers every 4 months.
I did not go inside. You did.
Our son has gone all the way up
our
to the burial
12-year-old,
chamber.
yeah.
Need to talk to him when he gets back.
Yeah.
He was first in line for the burial chamber.
Yeah. It's a long climb up.
It's 480 feet high.
My grandchildren always go around saying, awesome. Now I'm going to go home and tell them I know what awesome means.
Yeah. A new definition of what awesome
yes,
is about.
Yes. It's fascinating. Fascinating.
Of course, the children of Israel walked through these deserts, and maybe they saw the pyramids. Do you have any feelings biblically of this location?
I just wondered if these were some of the pyramids they helped build when they were slaves.
Well, from here our series is going to move over to Israel, and that's just what the children of Israel did. They went from Egypt through the Sinai and the wilderness to the Promised Land. Before we go, I want to tell a little bit about that Exodus. You know, when the children of Israel left, they looked at those same pyramids. To them, too, they were ancient works. Imagine, ancient monuments. And they left under the most difficult circumstances. On the Passover table, there are foods that go with the story of the Exodus. And they tell a kind of story of their own. They tell a story of salvation in the Messiah. In this way. The father begins, the first thing he tastes is bitter herbs and gives everyone some to eat. They usually use a chip of horseradish and eat some with the unleavened bread. It's awfully bitter. I liken that to our lives before we met the Messiah. A bitterness, sometimes a sweetness. There's also on the table what's called charosis, a mixture of apples and nuts and cinnamon grated together. Sticky, sweet, tasty after the bitter herbs, but you wouldn't want to eat very much of it. And that was our lives. You might say bittersweet. And then comes the meeting with Messiah, and that, of course, is made in the great biblical type of the lamb that is slain and the blood put on the doorposts of the Jewish homes. Whatever testament I read, I can say, the blood of the lamb delivers me from bondage. And this is what happened in Egypt, of course. The Lord provided, and the lambs were slain, the blood put on the doorpost, the angel passes over, and you know this story, but think of it this way, that blood of the lamb is the moment of everyone's salvation, of delivery from bondage. Egypt, a type of the world, and that blood a way to go out of the world and into the promised land, into the kingdom. And they did go in the same manner as a salvation goes. The next thing on the table is the water. They dip in, and that represents the Red Sea. They usually take a parsley, dip twice. I say usually because sometimes Passover varies house to house and village to village, but the tradition in my place was we dip twice. And once for Israel, young and green in the springtime of its nationhood, it was the parsley, dipped once and comes out safely. And another time for the Egyptian army that tried to follow them, and down the hatch, and we eat it. So that dipping in the water and coming out safely, is that not reminiscent of baptism? The next thing in Christian salvation. So the bitter herbs, the bittersweet life of the herbs and the charosis, and then the blood, the salvation, and then the water, the baptism. And now we're in the wilderness. The next thing in the salvation experience is a long life, out among the pagans, out where it's hard to get food and water and where there's so much law. And that was the wilderness experience. Work at staying alive every day. This is the world and the unbelieving, the pagan world. And we have to go through it to get to the promised land. No one is taken to heaven the day they're saved. Well, they can be, but the scripture characterizes a life of service of the Lord, and not easy service. We're characterized as soldiers in an army, harvesters in a field, fishermen, work with the muscles and with the back. And we're not characterized as sitting back in chairs waiting to collect on our salvation, but rather working in the world to save others. Never working on our salvation. That's a free gift, as the Exodus was a gift to the children of Israel. But working our way through the wilderness, ever heading toward Jericho, the promised land. Why Jericho? Any of you have ever seen Jericho? Gosh, remember the oranges and grapefruits hanging off the trees and the cold water coursing up and down the gutters, flower boxes in the windows, out there in the middle of the most thankless desert. I mean, whatever side you approach from, it looks like you're on the moon. You lose all hope. There's nothing out there. And then the palm trees and that magnificent, huge oasis of Jericho. And how did the chosen people get in there to a city with walls 11 feet thick? They shouted, they blew on the trumpets, and the walls fell down. Joshua 6:5 says they shouted with a great shout. They blew on the ram's horns, and the walls fell down. And 1 Thessalonians 4:16 says a very similar thing. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout and with the sound of the trump of God. The shouts and the trumpets again. The clincher of this illustration is the name of the leader. In the Old Testament, Joshua. In the New Testament, it is Jesus, but Jesus is a Greek transliteration. His name is Yeshua in Hebrew, also Joshua. So again, when Joshua takes his chosen people to their promised land, you will hear the shouts, you will hear the trumpets. The entry into Jericho is a type, an illustration of the rapture of the church. Well, it's a pretty story, and we're going to cross the wilderness in effect before the next show, because the next show will find us at Jericho and by the Dead Sea where they entered Israel. Our offer tonight, the Living Waters video. And remember that it takes us till the shows are made well through the series to produce the videotapes. But if you would like the videotapes, this is a very good bargain. We're making them in bigger lots, and it's easier on us, and we pass the savings to you. The whole series of 12 programs is $99. Okay, sometimes you have to buy one Hollywood movie for something like that. Send to our post office box for $99 videos of the entire Living Waters series. If you like the music, the cassette is $12 and the CD $15. All right, that includes postage, handling, everything. So $12 and $15 for the music. Just tell us if you want it on cassette or on CD. Now, folks, I can sort of show you merchandise all day long, and we have a lot of it. If you send for our catalog, that's free, and you can order all you want. What we really need is funds. This is not a store, and we need the help of donations. You know, I spoke to a large audience recently, and the pastor asked them how many are viewers of Zola's program, and lots were. People raised their hands all over this auditorium. But when he asked how many are supporters of Zola's ministry, there were only a few. And I didn't, you know, I think the Lord ought to move people to what ministry to give to. I don't demand support from any given person, but if there's going to be an audience of 1,000 watching, and if 10 or 15 are going to support it, I'm just here to tell you that's not how a Christian work is supposed to be. Acts 2:45 says we have all things in common. So folks, if you haven't contributed, how about catching up with me? If you're enjoying these programs, remember that there's no free television, please, and help us. We can serve you now by phone. You can call the number on your screen. We'll discuss the offers with you, donations or whatever. Be glad to have you call, or write to our post office box, as always, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.